Well, it looks like the crowd here is just kind of dying in as we're settling in. So good afternoon, everybody. When I got the opportunity to actually present to you today, somebody told me, hey, you're presenting about DevOps. And you think to yourself, uh-oh, how many straws did you draw before you got the short straw? But there was really only one straw. So the good thing is it said, you know, what context do you want me to present to you on DevOps? Because I have a very interesting background, which I'll get to. But what I wanted to focus on today is not tell you how, because DevOps is very trivial as a concept in general, especially when you start talking about it in the business, in the enterprise. But what you can do with it is amazing. And my job here at Samsung is a testament to that, actually. So as my presentation gets started here, my name is Rich Balsewich, and I lead the Samsung Business Innovation Lab here in San Francisco. But if you're not familiar with Samsung Business or Samsung Business Services, we're an organization that started last year, Samsung Business and Samsung Business Services, which is providing that kind of relationship to everyone that is already using our devices, our handsets, our TVs. But mostly my job is focused on the mobile space and really innovating in the enterprise, because I'm still going into customers and seeing they're still battling things like email, contact, calendar, you know, problems we've solved hundreds of years ago, or at least in mobile terms, hundreds of years ago, which is like 3 months. But for the most part, I founded the lab itself, but not just the people that run in the lab, but the concepts that we operate underneath. And I believe in DevOps, at least to some degree, of getting things out there. But the goal is for my team is to create those innovation experiences without the influence or the peer pressure of a parent organization. So I kind of run an off the radar. And for people who work at Samsung, I apologize, but yes, it's off the radar kind of, you know, we're building things people use every single day. I can't really tell you about them because then there would be several people in the audience that get upset. So, and I've been doing that my whole life, right? I was a government contractor building things years ahead of their time, and you use them every single day. So I have a very interesting background when it comes to security and innovation. But now I live on the West Coast, and it's a great place because I get to see the things that you are asking me to do. I get to see you use them in your enterprise. I get to see your products expand and include those kind of experiences I'm looking for when I use my device against your corporation. So just a real think fast, and I think this applies very much. When I say the word hacker, what comes to your mind? Most people think this, that there's some crazy guy with his laptop, you know, trying to attack your corporation, right? Or some of you thought, well, it's not just one guy, it's a lot of guys, you know, a team or an army of people, you know, trying to hit your enterprise. And that's a big deal, right? Because when you're sleeping, they're not. And again, I have a different view of what a hacker is. And to me, my association is depersonified view, which means I don't tie hacker to people, because that's a really bad hacker, because he'll only be able to hack for the 8 hours or 20 hours that he doesn't sleep. Whereas I look at it as how many machines am I setting up to attack your machine or machines or your infrastructure or your cloud? Because for all the people that go really fast, rush to deployments, cut a lot of steps, you know, make a lot of things that you don't know how to take care of, that's a real problem. And if you go real fast, you're going to fail. And you can just open up the newspaper and, you know, figure out all the people that have already failed before you. So good lessons learned. Don't learn those same lessons, which are pretty abstract. Think of things in a different way. Just like the term hacker, hopefully next time you think or somebody says that, you kind of think of it in a different way. So for the same exercise, what do you think about when I say DevOps? It kind of depends on what white paper you read or what practice you're coming from. But really, DevOps is, again, one of those concepts where you say it without any context. Most people jump to the theory of what DevOps is, right? Where it's some kind of collaboration between key principles in your organization. Your development team, which hopefully you treat like the rock stars they are. The operations team, which are the ones running the show. Or the QA team, which is protecting your brand, protecting all those things that quality assurance are responsible for, whether it's policies, procedures, what have you. But the cool thing that happens in a space like the Innovation Lab is, without the operations team or QA, I'm building things nobody will ever see or ever use. Why? Because there's really no enforcement, there's no channel, there's really no way for us to collaborate or communicate or express those ideas, those innovations, or deliver those to our customers without some type of DevOps practice, right? So conceptually, this is what I think about without context. But I was reading some white papers when they assigned me DevOps, and I thought, well, what do most people define it as? What is the definition that people in their brains think of without a visualization of it? And to me, this is probably one of the best ones that I found, which was defined as a culture, movement, or practice that emphasizes collaboration and communication. So it's a culture, movement, or practice, right? So instantly people think, oh, I need a tool chain. I'm going to tie all these things together so all this happens, where collaboration can happen with an email. It can happen with any sort of communication protocol you get on your phone. But the goal here, and the goal that I've done for my team, which some of them are here today, they don't really know, but I practice psychology on them, and DevOps is one of those psychologies that I like to practice because we birthed a culture where it's very collaborative amongst ourselves. Our engineers are all staffed with different skill sets, different ways that they prioritize their job at Samsung, but also their career, because most of the time when you go work for a customer or an enterprise, how many people are still using jQuery? Just a couple people. Okay, sorry, that's all I say. But jQuery was a great example of something that I touched maybe 5 years ago, which was great for mobile web, and people were building it into mobile applications. Single page design. There was a lot of things that if you're still practicing that, that's a bad practice, and it's being perpetuated and perpetuated. I'm not saying those tools are fine. That's why I say I won't really tell you the how of DevOps, because the how is really influential by the practice that you're in. So, but if you can understand the way that I'm looking at this is actually as a culture or a movement, you'll actually get to see the productivity that my team has been able to accomplish with very small number of people. And that's just through power of collaboration. So if your brain immediately went from the theory, you didn't care about those three bubbles of DevOps being DevOps and QA, maybe you thought about the practice of DevOps. And that's usually where my brain goes. I was a consultant for a long time, so I've been a part of some companies that had their own delivery methodology, a way that they run their business, run their dev shop, run their people, run their life cycles. And as soon as you start delivering something like that, or you have your own way of building something, delivering it to production, you start to get a bunch of different people in the process, a bunch of different stakeholders, identifying those people, especially trying to build a collaborative communication operation, DevOps, something you can't really touch and feel, but want to experience or take advantage of. That's really hard when you try to get all those people together. So collaboration in enterprise is very tough. But also from practice perspective, you have all these things called tool chains. And I don't know how many people are, deeply rooted into the tool chains, but you need them. You need some of them. Do you need all of them? It depends on the size of your organization. But to me, a tool chain is nothing more than a ization of something, a virtualization, an orchestration, configuration, basic concepts of, doesn't matter if I'm building software or if I'm building a business or a practice or whatever it might be. These are just generic concepts that, as terms, we need to apply these to our practice. But the other part that really gets me frustrated, and that's me in the bottom corner, my team likes to say I have three sides of me, which is just normal, a little stressed out, and then this guy. So this is what happens when people try to enforce policies on innovation. I mean, this is probably everything most developers or administrators or users of tools or systems within your company face every day. Like, what steps do I need to follow, and why is there so many? And why haven't these steps changed as we change our practice? Why haven't we modernized not just the software we're trying to deliver, but the practices in which we deliver them? And then we fell into a situation where, I'm not sure how many people experience this, but there's so many products, and then you reach a point where, have we done this before? Am I even allowed to do this? The can I syndrome. And so then when you start to mix that in with stake owners, it's the, have we done this before? Can I? Have we done, can I? And so many people are like, ask so-and-so, to the point where without this, you're going to keep going in a circle. So to me, the best way to start is small, right? You have to come up with a plan. Understand your organization, come up with a real plan, because does this really work? And yes, spoiler alert, it does work. So after about 1.5 years of running the lab, where we started out where this was like a startup within a startup. So it was kind of, not only was the parent facing some of those policies, tool chains, and company practices and compliance, but also I was facing those same things, and I came second after that. So through my business, I realized very, very quickly that if you consider yourself a real business, then require some sort of DevOps. If not, you're going to fail, and then you're still going to require some sort of DevOps, and I call that DevOps Light, which is, don't try to boil the ocean. Let's pick apart some of those critical features where one simple process, product, tool, service can turn into a new revenue stream. Doesn't really matter what it is. I think about it like mobile, where before mobile was websites, if you didn't have a website, your company's dead. and then somebody took your domain, and now you're facing the same thing where people look for apps first. They may not use your app for a very long time, but usually they look there first, and then they use it for what they need, and then it goes like all the other apps to the back of their phone, right? So keeping your device, keeping your presence on the front of their device where they click it every day, you need to have some engaging experiences that want to keep back. So these are all the kinds of products or processes or services that you're compiling and building in your enterprise that if you shared them among your different business practices, you'll have a much better story to tell. You'll have your operations people telling a better story or the sales people telling the story. So I came up with a DevOps process, or for my Canadian friends, process, because I know they say that differently. And I didn't use the word function because if I say that over and over and over, they're recording this and I didn't want to have any slip-ups. So let's go with process for my friends. We'll start with the big picture versus reality. Then let's talk about your business and the byproducts. Let's bring it all together, break it apart, then reassemble. And then let's start simple. Start smart because it'll never stop. Once you show somebody something, they're going to take it and run with it. So what happens when that happens? I can tell you exactly. And then I'll show you a really great example how our strategic partnership with Red Hat really saved my business, which was supporting a completely new business. Okay. So I think I've drawn this picture, or I've seen this picture almost in every single booth. I've drawn this for every single customer, which is kind of just understand the big picture. Really understand what your business is, what's connected to it, what are all the different systems you have, because those are the places where you'll make those minor improvements that can affect the whole organization. So when you're creating a DevOps that's this large-scale organization where you got products that's consumer-facing, behind the firewall facing, just for employees, your internet versus intranet, then you really need a DevOps practice that reaches far beyond just one person or your team. Because in order to drive adoption, you got to get people to put down the pen and paper to really do the 5-3 ratio. If anybody's ever heard about the 5-3 ratio, whatever took you 5 minutes, 5 seconds, the old way better take you 3 minutes or 3 seconds the new way. Why? Because no one's going to use your product if it's the exact same time as busting out your laptop, log in a VPN just to do that one task. So we're past the pager days, so now it's time to kind of really understand the picture and the processes and the services and have DevOps to help you meet that initiative. So again, I mentioned it has to be integrated and automated. Nobody is going to use a process that interrupts their day-to-day. Try to ask a salesman to do something that's going to interrupt them selling. How many people are going to believe the salesperson will do it? Is there any salespeople here? Would you interrupt your business or sale if you had to follow a process that wasn't deeply integrated or automated? There you go. So that was probably a common question, but somebody answered, so it's not just me. It's got to be true. So the other thing about it is it's got to be simple and it's got to be secure, and it needs a full-time employee, right? This is DevOps is a practice. It's like a baby. If you make a baby, you have to take care of this baby, or it's just going to go to the wayside. It's going to become shelfware. Somebody's going to spend a hard time developing a process that nobody uses or follows, or they're going to hurry up, rush it to production, and they're going to miss a few steps. So again, if you have this big picture, you got to really look at all those tool chains, look at what's already sewn together for you so you don't waste a lot of time engineering something new that already exists. You're more assembling products, solutions, tool chains that match your business. And everywhere I go, they want to have DevOps increase their revenue and be free. So these are my favorite words together. So let's make revenue from nothing, and I want to pay nothing for it. So this is, invent the invisible, and then let's make revenue on it. So if you can make DevOps a practice that generates revenue, doesn't get in the way of your salespeople, your operations people, it's part of their normal day-to-day process, then they're going to adopt it. It's going to be great, which, this is the unicorn in my appearance, because this is the realistic picture that we see, which is most organizations immediately want a ROI-focused anything. Whatever you're going to do, what's the investment, and what's my return on my investment? And those are usually hard stories to sell when you're saying, well, I want to run my business better, and if I run my business better through these DevOps practices, it's going to yield these results. Luckily, when we went down this path, it was more of, let me just show you. There was really no pressure because the stuff I was doing every day was making huge impacts past email, past calendar, past just the normal things you get out of the box with your device. But otherwise, most companies are just right-staffed. They're just collaborative. They have just enough to say, I don't need another process to follow. I'm already sending the salespeople this information for the demo, or whatever it is that they're trying to, get out there and use the right ammunition to close the deal. So in this case, if you are, in a normal organization focused on ROI and right staffed and just collaborative, then you're going to want a world record without exercising. This is my most favorite analogy. They're like, can you run a 5-minute mile? And I'm like, well, I've never run before. And they're like, let's try it. There goes everything you have. Hamstrings, knees, elbow, everything. And you might look hilarious doing it, right? Can you imagine somebody's never run before and wants to set a world record? Awesome. But anyway, so how I lead my DevOps, which is developer-led operations, I know what my phone could do better than anybody who's selling my phone. Why? Because most people are selling it based on some kind of specification, how it could change your business, change your life. But I'm the guy that comes in and actually shows you, like, this is what it does, here's how you do it. And that's really my job, is if I take the things as a developer and say, look, that's not really the pitch for the device or for the security or how we're supposed to use the device. That's not the Samsung experience with our device. Well, PowerPoint's going to get you so far, and attention span is going to get you negative. So the way to do it is to actually build something real, touch and feel. And that's a real dangerous game to play, because if you give somebody from the sales team something that looks, acts, and feels like production, a prototype becomes a prototype, right? It goes right into production. Nobody even asks. It looked fine on the device, because people look at the faucet head and never the plumbing, right? So as long as water comes out, they're like, let's sell it. So we handle it with a process called next generation viral, right? Which is, we went to one conference where we did kind of an app for just our internal effort. And half the room had it because they read the email from me, and half did not. So I spent my conference standing there trying to get to people who didn't read my email the application. And I thought to myself, okay, well, that's great, but why didn't you just read the email? It's fine. Oh, we have a broken collaboration piece. We have to solve something, because me standing here, I'll have 2,000 email by the time I hit the door in an hour. So, you got to think of it ways of driving adoption through viral. So once somebody takes it and runs with it, how do you control it then? That's where it gets harder, right? How do you prevent the salespeople from taking something and giving it to your customer? What if you just gave them the APK? Well, I know what to do with an APK, but for the most part, that's not a good practice either, right? So really setting up a practice that really enables everybody, but also baking in those kind of requirements that the customer's not asking for, those operational requirements that everybody cuts out of scope because they don't want to pay for it. That's the stuff that I like to build in to make my applications sustainable, maintainable, upgradable, really making it something that's viral, that sticks to you, and then when you want to pass it to somebody else, I'm aware of it, right? So controlling that virus as it spreads. And that's a good problem to have, having everybody use your software. But as I mentioned before, our DevOps don't get in the way, especially for the developers, right? Because their creativity comes from writing code, not from checking it in, not from branching it, merging branches, really trying to clean up after themselves. That should be part of your normal dev practice, right? So that way devs can flow right into ops. You have your organization set up in source control in such a way that it matches your business. So how do you know what business you're in if you just started? How do you know what your byproducts are? So that's kind of what we'll cover next. But your DevOps must have strict controls. If you don't want somebody to have these things, how do you turn it off? How do you expire an APK? Then you start getting into things like licensing and license management and controls of things. But you can start small and kind of bake those in and figure out how to bake it into the way that you feel comfortable. Just like software I write, I let people try to steal from it because I'm already watching you. So then we can call you almost immediately to say, hey, you used the system illegally. And they say, how do you know? And that's, again, controls that nobody knows we have, but I bake those into our tools. So that way when somebody calls me, I already knew they were going to call and for what reason. But again, part of the development operation cycle. The other thing that I like, and I was going to use bullying, but that's like not a good term these days. So shaming is kind of how I like to do it, where anticipate or encourage participation through really making somebody feel bad that they're not using it. And I think the best case I saw was when I was at a conference and everybody was on their phone. Everybody else was like, why is half the room on their phone? And the other people are just, oh, I need to get that too, right? So luckily most people are looking at me, which means you don't have that other app we built. So, but again, really trying to drive participation, because again, this is a life cycle, something that the more you feed it, the bigger it will grow. The more you educate it, the more it will grow. The more you integrate it, the better it is for everybody. It won't get in the way. It'll kind of make its own life cycle, if you will. So in order to accomplish that, process number 2 was to understand your business, right? Because most people start in their job, a couple quarters go by, 1 quarter, 2, or a year, and you're still marching to the same orders. You know, you're still writing jQuery, or you're still maybe not looking at the difference between Angular 2 and React.js, technologies that are changing the way that you bind things in the device. So when I started, I thought to myself, okay, I was hired to do a job, start up an innovation lab, so I already know I'm going to build things, and I'm going to have byproducts from those things. So from an innovation perspective, I call them micro apps, because apps to me, or an application, is an app plus complication, right? So an app is just a bunch of features jammed together with some workflow added in there. But from my standpoint, as I already mentioned, we're building all these micro apps, all these microservices. Like, how many application has a login? Everyone, right? Especially from the enterprise perspective. How many people are writing their own login workflow? Is anybody writing that? Hopefully somebody's not reinventing the wheel. It's kind of like if you're going to use a security hash, don't invent your own. I mean, a lot of people would want you to use your own security stuff because you're going to do it wrong. You know, so that's the part where, as you look at these things, the byproducts that came out of my lab, they went from being like, hey, check out this demo. It's fully integrated using the Red Hat mobile application platform, and it ties into my system of record. So we're down there doing demos, and we're updating our system of records, and people are like, oh, I just have to change the endpoint to my system of record. Now I have a prototype, which, I don't know if you build software, usually a demo or a full-blown application doesn't take a week. You know, you're going to cut some corners there. So knowing that you're going to create these things out of the innovation lab really helped. But the good thing is our first customer was internal. So there was really no pressure. We're just getting started. My team was just getting started. I only think I had 4 or 5 people at the time. But we took on some internal projects to start testing out these modules, if you will, these micro apps or services, or just these features alone. And a feature would be like, I need a barcode scanner, or something to check in an attendee at the booth, you know, some NFC reader. That's not a service where there's a lot of intellectual property, right? If you have an SDK that's going to something, and if 2 developers with the same caliber of skills wrote against the same SDK, the implementation of the function should almost look the same, right? And if they don't, you could shame the other person that their coding is bad, or they don't know how to read an API, or whatever it might be. But basically, the intellectual property at this point is taken out. We don't need to really put that into the implementation of a function to go get NFC. So we write all these micro apps and services that, you know, if I need my phone to talk to a watch, I don't really want my customer to figure out the accessory protocol. How many people want to read somebody else's SDK and figure it out? Okay, good. Nobody raised their hand. So me neither, because I mean, there's enough things on the internet, and by the time that I get to actually reading the right one, I find out it's the wrong version. And Stack Overflow, if you don't sort it right, I'll give you the wrong answer from 2009. So again, if you're Googling the answer, again, starting with services, modifying those services of what's really out there, and then tweaking those services and trying those things, perfecting those things. And I think the internal projects made us go and realize a little further that these are the ones that are the most unorganized. It's really hard to write a content-driven application for someone when they don't have their content together, right? I can build you software, but is it going to be self-healing when you change the entire format of the data structures? Well, not overnight it won't. But for the most part, you know, we move down the stack. And then we realize that when you start mixing efforts between internal and external, it gets progressively harder. How do I deploy this? How do I control it? And who owns it? Like, once this goes into production, what's the team that's going to own it? What's the life cycle if something like Samsung Knox needs a security update, which we push once a month? Right? Those are real problems where you start to look where if somebody's already connected to you or these systems are connected, then it totally changed the way that you approach your problem. And then when you look at what the customers do, these are just one-off projects. You can't really reuse anything. Most of the stuff that I see from the customer's perspective is just please help us integrate these SDKs. Get us off the port where I don't know how to call this service on your device, but once I call it, I need it to do X, Y, and Z. So that's really what our business became, which is we started with innovation. We built so many pieces of the puzzle that assembling them for a customer, we took out like putting the whole border together, mostly the inside. It was really just the main contents of the picture we were replacing. And we started shortening the dev cycles from months to weeks to days. And so that realized that we had some stuff that we were building that we need to do DevOps for. Otherwise, we're going to lose this momentum. So if we build something innovation, how do I get it to the customer and to a point where it's been battle tested, it's been in the field a couple times from Samsung's perspective, so we feel comfortable that what it touches and what it hits and what it updates is secure and it works. So, and we have a lot of those products coming. So we built a DevOps practice off of it. So what we did was I took the avatars of all my bosses and put them in this slide just so they would proofread it for me. But for the most part, this is my boss, and he represents the sales team for me, which is if DevOps is only DevOps and QA, well, you're missing the most important people. The guy that will never use it if it integrates with or interrupts his sale. And I don't blame you, right? If my quota is based on sale, then I want to use something that doesn't affect that. Let me go to my customer with the information that I need, that they need, and not interrupt the conversation with them. But if my watch vibrates, I can tell you some pretty cool things. And we'll get to that because we built a demo for you. But then on top of that, so we need to support our sales team because those are the ones that go out there and get our business. Those are the ones that take our DevOps ideas and turn them into revenue streams. But also supporting ops. This is one of the the biggest complaints from an operations and maintenance perspective is the app does exactly what you need, but how do I know if it's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing? Where's the analytics? Where's the things that tell me that operationally this system is sound or I don't have to wake people up over the holidays? Those kinds of things. So not only enabling operations through analytics, but the actual operations of the system. The operations of DevOps, like the continual health of what's coming next. The sales team will hear about new innovations, stuff we're doing for our customers, stuff we've done before, stuff that they can repeat and at very low cost. Once we get there, then we get to the developers, which, again, one of my bosses. So this is a really interesting concept when he responds with, well, my organization and architects only support these technologies. I see that every day, which is, we got this Java implementation, it's really heavy, or we got this system of record from 1985. I think almost every single enterprise that I've spoken to has their first implementation of whatever their system of record is. And that makes it really hard because technology moves so fast. Some of those products now have standard data sets, which didn't exist 5 years ago. But now that everybody's kind of trying to follow a standard, these technologies are becoming more loosely coupled. So regardless of what you support, the technologies, just like JavaScript is powering Node, you're using services and you're using languages that provide the same technologies, same architectures that you would see with those old legacy huge app servers, web servers implementations. The other person is QA, who is in the audience today, but this is the most important part because if you put something out there that's not QA, it doesn't matter what it is. But I look at it from Samsung's brand. I think that if I put something out there, including me presenting to you today, that hurt our brand and didn't go through QA, I'd be in trouble. And the guy that would put me in trouble is sitting right there. So he's here watching me to make sure. But that's a real important piece, right? If you're rushing and you're not using the brand and you're not doing the security, it only takes one failure to ruin something that somebody established for the last 150 years, right? And I don't want to be that guy. So when you incorporate all these people together, this is my favorite quote. They said the same stuff last time. Let's just repurpose the old stuff, said a smart person who understands DevOps, which is they asked me the same time for the same brand. They asked me the same QA, the same policies. Why am I even entertaining those after one time? I say the same thing about software. If you're rebuilding administrative type controls, why are you doing that? That's crazy. Use a tool for that. Sew it into your architecture. Expand what you already have. Because there's certain systems out there today where if you just upgrade that, they're going to give you features you never knew you even had, like an LDAP or whatever it might be, a system of record with mobilized friendly services that you can integrate to. But after I had all these people together, I kind of noticed one thing. If anybody's heard of the Model View Controller MVC design pattern, the Gang of Four from like 100 years ago, again, I call it the design pattern of everything. Doesn't matter what you're building. You go to a national home builder, he's not going to ask you to figure out the blueprint of a load-bearing wall and stuff. He already knows all that, right? So when you apply these kind of principles across your whole organization, you get all these people together. You want to figure out what their model is. What's the data that they're trying to look at? What is sales trying to do? Where's their data? Is it Salesforce, SAP? Where is their data? And then they want a view of it. Everybody just wants a view into that critical data. They don't want all of it. They want something that makes sense, a targeted, contextualized view that ties into their model or system of record. And the controller is everything else. How do you control the view, control the data, right? That's really why I say it's a design pattern of everything. Because after you break all these people up, in order to set up a practice, you need to set those base blocks, those building blocks, your foundation. Because if you just put down a San Francisco apartment, which is like 300 square feet for way too much money, you're going to look at, okay, how do I add a second room when I already put down 3 blocks for the foundation? You're like, well, I got to rip up the whole thing and add more blocks. So conceptually, if you can understand the different pieces and apply some of the design to them, to the model, how do I update the system of record? What's the best approach? Should be upgrading my system? Should I look at what the vendor is going to provide in an upgrade? Or is it best to go with a mobile backend as a service solution where I can abstract a layer from it and then build all that logic in there and connect that to my system of record? So design is really key when you start to really design a practice around DevOps. And the goal is to loosely couple everything, tightly encapsulate, distributable, and continuable. I don't know how many projects that I've been on where they say the developer left and I don't know what he did, and here's his code. I'm in the situation myself. I got a lot of talented people who wrote a lot of code. What it does, I have to read it myself. Luckily, I'm an engineer, so. But for the most part, if you look at some of the stuff that my engineers build, where their variables are like A equals whole program, and B equals whole function, and C equals I don't even know because I don't have that file. But that's what I mean, like the concepts that developers are using is they're already building these components, these modules, these tightly encapsulated distributable. That's how all frameworks work. If you don't do it this way, you're going to break the framework that you're putting in. So again, design is everything. And now you need to balance what's in progress and in production. Because this is where I found that we built these awesome libraries that do something. And then we get it out into production. We're like, man, it would be so much better if it did just one more thing. And so then we go back and update it. And then we're like, okay, now where did we deploy that to? Right? And without a version control, without a source management structure or practice, it got really complicated really fast. Luckily, I got a whole group of people that understand everything I'm talking about, and they help me break this up into manageable pieces, which is how do we keep track of what my customers have? How do I set up my organization for stuff that's in progress, stuff that's in production? And then what's the next step when we want to integrate those things together for release 2.0, 2.1, whatever it might be. This is why I asked about some of those common practices. If you're writing your own login authentication workflow, that's wasted money. That's wasted time. Common practices should never be written. And I say that maybe only once. Because if you write it once correctly, then you should just be able to reuse it with slight modifications, slight enhancements. Or you can go find somebody that's leader in industry that's already doing it, like creating a salt hash or some kind of library for encryption, and use that. And then make that your principle, make that your practice, make that everything in development follows, and then operationally, this is how I'm going to take care of it when you do things like that. So again, try not to write things, assemble versus engineer, and stuff that's already been solved. Look for the resolution, don't try to build it yourself. And that'll turn most of your application efforts or solution efforts into assembly versus engineer. Engineering is way more expensive than assembling solutions correctly with proper documentation and testing. But for the most part, if you start moving your efforts into assembly and integration, your dev cycles are going to shorten. That first one, that first application, the first end-to-end that we did was such a heavy lift. We didn't sleep for many, many weeks. But once we're done, we're turning around applications for version 7 in like 2 days, which is unheard of. So that's why I say that if you write it once, just make sure you're writing it the right way. If you're adopting somebody else's framework or technology, understand it very well, because if they're up and gone the next day, how do you enhance it? How do you continue it on? People are still using technologies, as major platforms like Angular go from 1.x to 2.0 and everything changes, then what are you going to do? Well, you can break off pieces and start writing modules of what changed between ES5 and ES6, or between the way they're binding things to a device from a program perspective. Those are kinds of the things where you really need to understand your business, your practice, and set up a principle that everybody follows for your DevOps. But then when you start taking your idea and your concepts and go across industry or go across your company, and in Samsung it feels like you're going across industry because how many things we actually do. Watches, phones, tablets, TVs. There's just so many things that our innovation lab touches every day that you wouldn't really consider it mobile. But when I take my phone and walk up to our TV in the lab and it just starts playing what I'm looking at, like automatically, like that's a really nice experience to have. And a lot of people, when they come to our lab, are kind of blown away with the stuff that we've done and ask why haven't we used this, or why doesn't my business do that? But we're working on it. So when we started with our first idea, we came to the realization that education is huge. If you gave a developer, I have a UI designer, which helps out a lot, because a developer, I have a code that you can't write a list view for me. I mean, if you're just going to get data and showing me a list view, you didn't try very hard. And if you took all week to do that, I'm kind of disappointed, because everybody's been going to a service, getting data, and showing it in a list view since, I think, the invention of the internet. So, think of the user experience, because those are the people that are going to adopt your product. So think about it creatively. Don't necessarily say, well, this is all the programmer can do, because I've challenged my developers, and they really done things that I never knew we could do. But the cool thing is, after we've got through the education piece and the app kind of grew on people, then it became more of, well, what else can we integrate with? So we took a concept of just a content-driven application, and we added the concept of compliance. Well, how do we do compliance? We wanted to be able to make sure that if you were supposed to check in at that barcode over there, that I knew that you were checking in at that barcode. So one of the things that I put into the system was, I noticed that before we even had the expo open, everybody already checked in. And that means two things. Somebody either sent out a list of the barcodes, and they're just like, boop, 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 I'm done with my training, which I think every salesperson would do. Just saying. But to the guy in the front row. But that's what I mean. It's interrupting their job, right? Why can't we use beacons? So you'll see our demo downstairs where we had a QR code. We let people think that they were getting away with something by allowing them to check in. But then when we showed the report to human resources, like, oh, by the way, all these people checked into all 30 booths under 3 minutes. Like, you must have been just running around hearing. But the concept was they had to go to these booths to learn about Samsung products, right? So from a training perspective, the people who actually wanted this application, who wanted to put this practice out there, they didn't think about those kind of things. So then we started putting in controls like, you can't check in within 6 minutes, because if you didn't go to the booth and listen to the spiel, then I know you didn't listen for, 6 minutes I think was a lot of time, because most people's attention span, it's like 3 minutes. So for that standpoint, it's, again, an education and integration piece, and now we're just replicating it. We've figured out a formula that works for our company, and now we can turn it around in a day or two. Even if their content is terrible, we figured that out too. Fraud, figured that out too. And we just kept building in these operational pieces that were never part of the requirements, but they were coming out of development. But operations was like, this is the best thing you did for my business. You saved the return on investment, because now I can tell the people, they're all trained, they're all certified. They checked in, their physical location was at this booth listening to me talk about these topics, which is pretty cool. The only problem is, from an innovation lab perspective, now I'm turning into a production support guy. So just knowing that if you have a really good idea and you're going to champion that idea and you're going to set up all these DevOps and all these processes and go through all this, figure out who the full-time employee is, because without it, it's going to lose momentum. It's going to lose its value really quickly. Okay, so think about deployment. And deployment to me is everything, every single thing. So how many people have apps out there for your enterprise? Just a couple and a sneeze. All right, so that's good. Some people raise your hand. So you know that deployment is everything, because if I asked you what your deployment was, I think every person would say something different. I use this container, I use this MDM, this MAM, this EMM, and people don't even know what those acronyms are sometimes, which is mobile device management, mobile application management. You're releasing products. You're putting stuff out there. And it only takes one bad click, 1-star rating, doesn't matter if it's consumer or enterprise, for everything to fall apart. And if you go really quick and you don't think about deployment, that's when you get into a massive, massive support case, right? So this is where it becomes, you thought you were doing something really good for the company, you're mobilizing the salespeople, you're giving them the data, and you want to go on to the next innovative product. Well, without somebody supporting all this, then it became another job for me. So I have like 8 jobs. But the other thing that we found to be very successful for this is to start small, because an end-to-end project will flush out most of those things. If you're just focusing on an endpoint and you're not thinking about the deployment or what it connects to or how it gets deployed or who takes care of it, then you're going to fail, right? So if the idea is this, massive deployment, then I wouldn't try to build my DevOps project or process off of that. I would start with something small that hit all those major stakeholders. Who has to be involved for me to put Samsung's brand on this application and release it behind the firewall? Or release it into the external, internal, where some of the data is coming from behind the firewall or from a cloud service that's specifically ours, to the stuff that's consumer friendly. And if you're trying to put products out there that are both external and internal, it gets even more complicated, right? It gets to the point where, how do I deploy something on a different platform? How do I get them to test it? And it's different across every platform. So there's isations, right? There's techniques and strategies. It's what Red Hat is all about here, teaching you, right? That the OpenShift, all the platforms that they have, the mobile application platform, the map. So again, we started small, and it really was a way to kind of help us define our DevOps. Like, what is the champion thing that our company is going to invest in DevOps for us to continue on? And this has been our one application where we started small, we went through all these pain points, we got the right stakeholders involved, from QA to operations to the salespeople. And the salespeople are the best, because once you give them something that makes them close a deal better, they're your best friend. So I don't know how many weddings I've been invited to, but I know it's just because of the app and the effectiveness of the app. But the other thing, does anybody watch the show Silicon Valley on HBO? This one has to hit you if you watch last Sunday's. And I did this before Sunday. This presentation is like a week and a half old. But analytics should match experience. And I just want to tie it into Silicon Valley. If you have not seen last week's episode, earmuffs, because Richard says something in there. I went to look at the analytics of our software, and he figured out something that was totally bogus. And he was like, well, how am I supposed to upgrade this if we paid for users? The analytics didn't match the experience. He had all these people using it, but they weren't using it at all, right? It didn't match. So that really becomes an interesting play where your analytics don't match the experience. It's hard for me to expand something when it's not matchy-matchy. And by matchy-matchy, I mean 1 compared to 10,000 difference, right? A huge magnitude of how do I scope my next release? What is the feature everybody's using all the time? Make sure you're analyzing the right pieces and correlating that data. Correlating is the hardest part because of time. But again, if your analytics match experience, it helps that idea foster, it helps it educate, integrate, and just be able to replicate. So the other thing I like to do is re-gift great packages. It's not like you get a third toaster for your wedding and you're just going to give it to the next person. I'm talking about those like gold nuggets that my team creates where we take all the intellectual property out. That's the hottest topic today, is where does intellectual property start and where does it stop? And to me, I mentioned it earlier, if you take 2 SDKs and write that same code, and you're a good engineer, you're going to just say, open barcode scanner and give me the result, and if it fails, do something else, right? That's really how simple it is from a conceptual perspective. But once you already have those great ideas, those great features, give them away. Work with the customer, work with the enterprise, work with your internal people, to make sure that you can take those really nice, non-sensitive business practices where it's more about the technology and getting the job done, and re-gift those. So we do that at Samsung. If anybody's ever heard of our Samsung Enterprise Alliance portal, SEAP, anybody hear of that? If you haven't, check it out. It's seap.samsung.com. And really what we do is we don't give these things away for people just to put all over the internet. So we do require a login and a Samsung account. So that way we know who you are and who's using our stuff, because there's stuff in there where we have SDKs, but if you're using Apache Cordova, does anybody use Apache Cordova or some type of, okay. So if you're writing hybrid applications and you want to connect to those native hardware features, most people use a library, use a framework for that. And we support those frameworks too. And we have some of those code bases where you can start from, so you're not always starting from scratch. You're really kind of getting those great gold nuggets from us at a real time in our portal. So if you haven't heard of it, check it out, SEAP. And what I call this whole thing is DevOps Light. So at minimum, if you just keep an eye on some of these things where if you don't have a DevOps practice, or if your DevOps practice is broken, or you're having a hard time selling it, I found that one successful story that went end to end, and the analytics matched up from how many people are using it, what features they're using, why did it save us money, which is always a great case, versus I saved us a lot of money, which means it can save everybody a lot of money. Let's try to figure out a practice to keep this momentum going, to keep this now product in existence so we can continually use it and reuse it and re-gift it. So that's what I call my DevOps Light. But that's really not that exciting because, again, how many people work in a small organization where it's a startup within a startup? You need something that matched kind of that big picture. And so here's my example of where Red Hat really saved us and really changed the way that my business runs by explaining it or educating everybody else on Mission Impossible. So when I first started our business, we had 6 people, and we were given 4 weeks. We had no projects to date. We had no we had computers. That's about it. And then we had some software to write software. So that's about it, IDEs. That's all we had. And my boss, who said, okay, you got 4 weeks, we got this event coming up, we need you to go ahead and create an event experience multi-platform. And by multi-platform, I mean multi-platform. So it sounded like Mission Impossible, but again, I have a team that's really well versed in full stack engineering, front end, back end, everything, and they bail me out every day. But one of the cool things is our strategic partnership with Red Hat. They have this product called the Red Hat Mobile Application Platform. How many people have used it, tried it, know about it? Okay. If you haven't raised your hand, this is a really good example of if you're not using something like an MBAS or a backend as a service, infrastructure as a service, take a look at those things. Those are the things you're probably writing yourself, engineering yourself, then assembling, maintaining. You know, it really becomes a mess. But this platform allowed us to focus on the stuff that meant a lot to us, which is what is that visual representation that we're going to show to the consumer, to the people attending our event on any device that they bring, whether it's a watch, phone, or tablet, or want to sync it with a TV. How could I focus on all of that kind of experience when we had nothing to support it? No services, no analytics, no any of that. There would be no way that you could assemble something that quickly in 4 weeks that actually engaged the user enough where half the room wanted it, and the other half was like, well, I don't know, figure it out yourself. You should have read your email. So this was one of those great examples where we're like, okay, well, wow, Red Hat's got a mobile application platform. Well, why don't we just try that? So that's what we did. So the first thing that we did was we took everything that would make our application break, all that static code, static services, our images, the stuff from the system of record, the way that we built our software. They have a Git repository baked into it, so I can actually put all the code there, build from my Git, really set it up like I would do for production on a mass scale, or at least try and fail a few times with it. But it really decoupled what I had to do from the rest of the end-to-end. And the best part about it is I could just point my company to a white paper that actually says the security of their model, the analytics that they're using, the way they're storing the information, where the information is going, what cloud it's touching, all of the demographics and location information that really gets people uneasy, especially with corporate or sensitive data. You know, it wasn't something I had to take on, document myself. It was, we had a strategic partner who has this already, and I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I put two smart people talking together, and I got the approval from the stakeholder, like, let's do this, let's try it. So 1.0 really provided us a very simple end-to-end solution that met the business need in 4 weeks. And my team, I think, got like a half day. I think it was like a half day off after that. So it's a really tough team to work on. I'm just kidding. Anyway, but what it did do was we proved that the way they did it before was not only a bad experience, but I had analytics that showed, and I had this viral kind of sensation taking over when we had people from headquarters in Korea come over, and everybody's not paying attention, and they're all looking down. Why? Because it had push notifications. It alerted people of who was winning the drawings and all the cool things that were really, let me go back in the app and check and see if I was a winner. You know, we really had those viral hooks in there. But the other thing was the security. We didn't have any vulnerabilities. We put this out in the consumer store, and this was something where you had to put it in the consumer store. How else would you get it? But we tied in login. I didn't write my own login routines and workflow. We built it into the infrastructure. So it was definitely a multi-factor authentication, which was pretty cool, that my team came up with. But again, it allowed us to just take things from their platform, tie it directly into our endpoint, and just use it. And because we used the platform, we were able to get those security and analytics to what do we need to fix? Well, we had some lagginess on one of our plugins, not for our platform, but for a different device. And so we instantly went to 1.1 just to fix that one code base. And we did it all from the cloud, redeployment and everything. So it was a very simple, really way to get it out the door. And then it went from there. Then 1.1 became 2.0. And we did 1.1 during the conference. We just went live with it because it was a simple change that we figured out in the lab and just hurry up and pushed it out. And luckily, we opened up an emergency case, so it was approved right away. But for the most part, the flexibility expanded. So we got this hooks in there because of the way we set up our DevOps, and we made these things where operations was like, you have fraud detection in here? This is awesome. And they're like, who told you to build that? And I'm like, well, I worked at the government, so fraud is what you have to protect against. You have to protect yourself always. You know, so I'm not a big user of social media, but for the most part, it's, you know, lock those things down, get those things in there. But the flexibility allowed us to span to version 7. We didn't have to tear down the infrastructure. We just told Red, we're like, hey, we have to set up the same thing again for 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, to where our deployments are 2 minutes. We spend most of the time just loading data. It's a context-aware application, and all we do is load data in a NoSQL database that we hook to our mobile backend as a service, and our application's ready to go, right? So this is kind of where we took something that wasn't a product. We just needed something to do in the time frames of the Thanksgiving, Christmas time. So that's what we did. We built something we know you need, that everybody would want to have, that everybody would want to use, and then we put those engaging hooks in there. And that's the kind of stuff we built DevOps around. So we took something that was a product, and we kind of built a practice around it. And the practice just allowed us to speed this up to where we built not just one product, but we got it up to 3 different types of products for our customers and for our internal people. It didn't turn into just one product. It turned into 3 different types of products, depending on the type of event that we were doing or having or hosting. But then on top of that, we had 15 releases of just those products. And then on top of that, we took all that innovation that we built, the DevOps practice that we're following, so there's a tight collaboration and cohesiveness among the teams, whether somebody's building something in Node using JavaScript in a different way, or somebody building something in Angular, and somebody else working on React, and telling what those differences are, or changing the modules so that way if somebody does want to try before it's in production while it's still in beta, we have that capability, and it's just taking a piece from here and a piece from here, integrating it together to meet that operations, and most importantly, sales. Without sales, DevOps, it's a waste of time, because salespeople have to be integrated, otherwise you won't know from a business perspective what are those pieces of the puzzle that the enterprise is still struggling with. Because if you're still trying to fix scrolling in your mobile application, something is terribly wrong, like terribly wrong. And I just went to a customer last week, and we were working on scrolling. And I said, oh boy, something is terribly wrong. So anyway, but really that's what it is. Like if you're really going soup to nuts, you can take something like a practice of DevOps, and you can turn it into a revenue stream, even if it's small, right? Because everybody's company pays money for something, or everybody's company needs to do these things repetitively. And if you have a very talented team operating under a good practice, then why not build it in-house? Or why not take advantage of some of those things? As large as Samsung is, why don't we take some of those pieces that we're pushing out there, letting people know about, or telling you about SEEP, educating you more so that your idea skips the education stage, goes right into integration. And then after integration is replicate. So you can focus on the piece like we did, where we want to integrate the solution on our devices. I didn't want to worry where the data was coming, how it was secured, how it was going to get to the device. All I wanted was a service to call to get the data that I needed for the view, or just give me that model for the view. So in my opinion, does DevOps work? The answer is definitely yep. And the reason why is these are just some of the examples that we solved. These are the problems that you face every day, which is we had conference apps, time tracker to a project. If you're just tracking a phone call and how long it takes, we have a demo downstairs, and I think it's if you are a lawyer or know a lawyer or have a lawyer in the family, they would want to check out this app because it records to the second. And since lawyers usually charge you for thinking about calling you, why not track the actual time of when they called you and actually record it to the system of record that is your record. So when he calls me, it'll actually record who, and he can fill out the metadata, and then it'll sync with your system of record. So not only that, one of the cool features for the map platform is that it gives you a what you see is what you get kind of drag and drop editor for forms. So maybe you're not an engineer. You can go get data from people. You can still collect that data. You can still use something as powerful as a platform just to do something simple like that. Where if it's, maybe you want to collect driver's license information and health card from a patient form. You don't need an engineer for that. That's just nothing more than using the Red Hat platform with a couple plugins that they already support using Cordova. So again, it's really some of those services that you find that we think about. So one of the ones that we did like a year ago, which was the fingerprint. How many people use the fingerprint technology in the application itself? Nobody. Just how many people use it to unlock your phone? Okay. So I look at the fingerprint as such a powerful capability that I don't care if it unlocks my phone. I'd rather have a 4-digit passcode that it only is known up here for obvious reasons. But for the most part, the reason why I think about it differently is, wouldn't it be great if you gave somebody your phone and they were just messing around, and maybe they were in Amazon, but to really include that, like Google Play does, to include the fingerprint in the transaction at the application level. You can do that. It's one line of code. Is this my fingerprint, yes or no? That's all you really need to understand, is that these technologies, it's not very complicated. It's just understanding where to get the right code and what year you're sorting your Google searches by, or come to the source of the people who understand the technology and can help you deliver it and faster and cheaper. So that's really what my business is here today, is to kind of open up your eyes to DevOps, where if you are practicing it, did you practice it like the way I've done, where I kind of started my own business within a business when my main objective was just to do innovative stuff. But with that little extra collaboration and communication between all my different organizations, we started to make products, and we started to make demos, and all those demos are on display downstairs. And that's just the power of the platform. One of the demos that I just wanted to tell you to check out while you're here is the sales inventory application. Why? Because most of the time your system of record between sales and inventory are two different systems. And you never want to take a mobile app and tie it to your mobile system. Why? Because if you have 100,000 devices connect directly to your system of record, that's a disaster. So having that type of middleware infrastructure to kind of broker those connection pools or data sets and start caching, that's really where we started to get into it. And our sales inventory starts caching data from our sales system and from our inventory system in a mashup collection that I call from my service. So I can look at data sets from two different sets of record, and all we did was write one query from a mobile endpoint. But if you have any other questions, I'll be downstairs for most of today and tomorrow. Hope to answer any questions or continue the discussion on DevOps if you have any, and hope you enjoyed my session. Thanks.